All right, guys, what is up? Welcome in another episode of GC Live. I am Wes. He is Chris. South Carolina spring football practice preview edition of the show. And as Shane Beamer said today, Chris, we ain't talking about transfer portal. We ain't talking about a new coach. We will, I'm sure, get into those things within the context of what we're going to talk about. But it is officially football talk. We're talking spring ball, previewing the Gamecocks, much like Shane Beamer did today, previewing the start of spring practice, which will be Wednesday morning. Media will be out there for a somewhat short but decent period of time as we'll be watching, trying to get a first look at some of these newcomers and the new coaches that will be, of course, on South Carolina staff this year. Beamer talked about that today, talked about some injuries, and talked about quite a bit. So that's what we're going to get into on today's show. But first, let me tell you about a few of our great sponsors. Our guy, Clint Hammond of CMG Home Loans. As always, y'all could probably read this one for us. ClintHammond.com, 803-422-6797. NMLS number 71597. Like we always tell you, if you're in the market for a new home or you're not now, but you want to be in the future, hit up Clint. He's just going to sit down, frankly, and y'all are going to go over your financial picture, your goals, what you're looking for, and he's going to be like, all right, man, this is what you can afford at this monthly payment, at this down payment. Just go through all the details, all the many options that you will have towards home ownership. That's what I did years ago, and Clint's been a friend of mine ever since. So ClintHammond.com, again, 803-422-6797.
And another one of our great partners, fine folks over at Ferry Chevrolet, conveniently located in Orangeburg, right between Columbia and Charleston. Started that business back in 1926, as you've heard me say, right here in the Palmetto State in St. Matthews. So just like with Clint and home loans and mortgages, if you are in the market for a new or used vehicle, if you're thinking about being in the market, make sure you give them the first chance to earn your business. You can go down to their place in Orangeburg, but of course you can also check them out online, ferrychevrolet.com, F-A-I-R-E-Y, Chevrolet, ferrychevrolet.com, or give them a call at 803-937-4531. Honesty, integrity, handshake, Joseph Ferry, fourth generation dealer, still running the show there. Check them out, ferrychevrolet.com, for their inventory, new and used vehicles, financing options, all that good stuff.
Chris, sometimes you just got to bust out the Brunt workwear. And so that's what we're going to do today. And, dude, the thing I like about this is, like, you can tell and just almost feel the sturdiness of this boot through YouTube or through Spotify, however you're listening, however you're watching. And, dude, this thing is absolutely legit. And we've got something new to tell you about with our friends at Brunt. And, you know, the great thing about it now, man, is if what we told you was not enough, and hopefully we have earned your trust to this point to where it was enough, but if it was not, and you've been thinking about Brunt, you've been wanting to try it, you just were not quite sure, you know what I mean? You can actually now, Chris, try these bad boys 100% free. And that doesn't mean you walk in the store and, like, try them on. That means you can put them through the paces, is what I'm trying to say, dude. Like, you can bring them in completely risk-free. You can wear them. You can take them out. I don't think we're going to have any more snow this year, but maybe you're in an area where you do get snow. Maybe you're going to be out in the heat. You're going to be working. First of all, Chris, the beauty of it is they're going to already be, like, broken in. As we've told people, you can wear these things right out of the box. They're still incredibly comfortable. But then let's say, and this is not going to happen, but just having the peace of mind to know that if it's not exactly what you were looking for, you can return it. No risk. So, you know, pretty awesome stuff there. Our friends at Brunt, man, they just got really tired of the brands cutting corners. You work too hard to be stuck in uncomfortable boots that just don't hold up. They built something better for you right now. And for a limited time, our listeners can get $10 off Brunt. Use the code GC at checkout. So just head to bruntworkwear.com, use the code GC, and you are good to go. After you do the order, I know some of you are, they're going to ask you where you heard about them. do us a favor and just say, hey, it was from Wes and Chris. It was from GC Live. It's from Gamecock Central. However you want to put it in there, just let them know that it came from us. So very, very sturdy boot. I'm about to break my desk with this thing, man. Very sturdy boot. So
super comfortable too. I love wearing mine.
Let's talk some football. What do you say?
Let's do it, man.
News today, as you know, Beamer sort of previewed last week. Hey, I'll give you guys the full injury breakdown this week, right? And so you knew, and this is one of those things, man. I feel like everybody, when they give a list at the start of spring, start of fall, football's a dangerous sport, man. You got people who are kind of recovering from different stuff, recovering from surgeries. There's always that gasp. How long is the list? How are so many guys out? And a bunch of them, I'm going to run through the whole list here in a moment. A bunch of them are just that. It's you are recovering from a prior injury, a prior surgery. However, the one that is certainly the biggest news of today's press conference, period, is that Josiah Thompson not only will miss the spring, but also Beamer said it like this: I do not anticipate him playing in 2026. So for all intents and purposes, he is out for the 2026 season. And Chris, this is kind of one of those things, and I really don't want it to sound like I hate when people will be like, oh yeah, I knew that already. And then people will be like, well, why didn't you tell me that? So I don't want it to come across like that. But this was one of those things that had kind of been circulating for some time. And Beamer even said it. Josiah it's one of those things. It's not like he got injured.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? And Coleman asked, was he injured prior to the portal? Yes. It's not like he got injured like in the last month, last week, or even last few months. This was something that was a lingering issue, lower body injury. I mean, we all typically know what that means. Lower body injury. And he essentially had played through it. So I would say this was not really strongly reported on yet because people are careful with injuries, as are we. And you didn't necessarily know, hey, is he truly going to have the surgery, or does it continue to be something he can kind of play through? So there's always this decision with athletes. Do we shut it down? Do we shut it down, have the surgery? In theory, what you're trying to do is, quote, fix it. So then it's something that is not going to be a long-term issue from that point forward, but you're going to have to go through that time period where you go through the surgery, you go through the rehab, and then you re-strengthen it. Chris, it's one of those things. It obviously is not good for South Carolina in 2026.
Mm-hmm.
Long term, it could be very good for Josiah, and then even could end up long term being good for everybody involved here because I just don't know. I think for a lot of people, maybe once you got over just the kick to the gut, let's be honest, Peak is out for the spring and the summer. We'll see what it looks like preseason. And now Thompson out for the spring, summer, and by all intents, the season. Yep. You're going, okay, that was the two most talented tackles on the team, you would say. So after you got past the gut punch, I think a lot of people maybe even get to the point of saying, doesn't this help you make a little more sense of the fact that Josiah took a step back this year? Josiah didn't necessarily appear to have improved the way you would have thought for a guy who does work hard, does go about things the right way. I'm not sitting here throwing excuses at the board, but I think if you really think about it, it kind of puts some pieces in place for you.
It does. It helps things make sense. And I think what a lot of people are looking at this through the lens, Wes, of, now you have a guy who went to the portal, came back, was your starter last year, did not have the type of season that he wanted or anybody wanted. And so you're right. I think it helps to a degree make some sense of that in your mind. But I also think that people are looking at it of going, all right, now you're down Peak, maybe, right? at least for now, and Thompson for the spring ball. And then maybe, like you just laid it out, Thompson probably for the whole season. That's what it looks like. Peak is kind of a wait and see kind of moving target, I think, in terms of when he'll be 100% full go. And so, what was one of the first things that people talked about with Jacarius Peak? That was a huge gut punch, right? Because you brought this guy in to help fix the offensive line. So it was your biggest problem on your roster last year. And you bring in a guy that you don't have to guess whether or not he's good. Like, he's a really good ball player. He goes down, right? The conversation after that switched to, all right, what's next? Well, Josiah Thompson, former 5-star. He's talented, more than held his own as a true freshman, did take a step back last year, but like, what were the reasons for that, right? We now know for sure not being 100% was part of that. Also, was it the scheme? Was it the coaching? Was it him individually? Like, there's all these different things that we've talked about. We talked about all year and all offseason on the offensive line. And so that was where people went after the Pete gut punch was, all right, well, this means that this is a big offseason for Josiah Thompson. Well, now he's not going to have that. And so then you start going to, okay, well, now what's next after that? What are the additional layers? What does that mean for the rest of the roster? How does Randy Clements during spring ball at a minimum, and then certainly going forward past that, how do you structure this offensive line? Because, if you date back to December, January, Wes, you're sitting there making, there might be some people out there that literally pencil in their depth charts, but in your mind, you're going, all right, Peak at left tackle. Hey, does that mean Josiah's playing right tackle? Hey, Shed Surratt, that probably frees him up. He's almost definitely a guard. You can plug in, transfer A here, transfer B there, returner here, there. Now that has been tested. Like, that has been completely flipped on its head, because now you're having to think about, all right, well, now what does this mean for Shed Surratt? Is he more likely to play tackle? Do you take a guy like Kojo Poku, who has played tackle, was ticketed for guard here? Does he stick there? Does he now need to get a look at tackle, right? Shane Beamer said today that he thought that they would be fine for the spring in terms of depth, but this is absolutely something that's going to test you on that front, right? And it might cause some additional shuffling. It certainly causes some uncertainty for spring ball and maybe going forward too.
Yeah, it does, man. So I promised I would go through all the injuries. Let me do that first before we continue. And the other big name would be Dylan Stewart, of course. I don't think, luckily, if you were like paying attention, this one probably not a surprise because he ended last year hurt. And Beamer had that press conference. I guess that was maybe signing day, where he was like, look, he's playing through this lower back stuff. He really just needed rest, needed to be able to get off his feet and do some different things in order to get it back to where it needed to be. So, I personally don't think there's a heck of a lot of reason to give Six too many reps this spring. I'd be like, hey, get him to Saturdays, basically. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
And Beamer said he would be limited to start practice, more of a continuation from the injury that he dealt with last half of last season. Won't be full go, will be limited in some areas, probably a little bit more limited the first week of practice, and then we'll see where he is from there. Beamer said we'll see where he is from there after spring practice. I think he meant after spring break, actually, just the way he said it. But regardless, I think they're going to be careful with Dylan, man. It only makes sense. And then you had a bunch of guys who we already knew had surgery last year. It was already reported, but just are continuing to do the rehab to that stuff. Kobe Saki-Pry and George Wilson and Quay Dodd, all at edge, are guys who are just going to be limited. DB Zabari Sandy, who had the lower body, kind of big injury last year. DB Jackson Berger. And then Jaden Gibson, the transfer from Oklahoma, someone who we've kind of been told, hey, if this guy gets back to 100% health, could ascend the depth chart. And so something to keep an eye on there, but most of those are guys that we already sort of knew about and were publicly reported on. It's just a matter of, okay, how quickly do they get back? How does this affect their development? And Chris, I think for a guy like Dylan, that takes me right into one of our biggest storylines, I think, for the spring. What's going to happen opposite of Dylan Stewart at the edge spot, and what's going to happen behind Dylan Stewart at the edge spot? Now, I think you just slide those guys in, and you're going to get your Anthony Addisons, your Julian Walkers, your Caleb Herrings, all those guys, a bunch of reps, right?
Yeah, bunch of reps for those guys. And, Anthony Addison took home an award last spring, Wes. Now, he didn't after, at the spring game that we were there calling. Now, not a guy that you projected to play a lot last season, a guy that was ultimately able to hang on to his red shirt, a guy that I think is a unique player because he looks maybe more like a linebacker, but has some natural pass rush juice, but someone that the staff seems to like as a special teams guy and as an edge guy. Certainly this is going to be a really big spring for him to, continue to come along. So when they open spring ball tomorrow morning, when we're out there, it's a group that's absolutely going to be lighter. You just went through, what is it, 4 guys from that edge room on the injury list. They're going to have to be careful, with even those guys in practice, right? Because you got long practices. It's going to start to warm up. You don't want to run those guys into the ground during practice that are on your current roster, because then guess what? Higher likelihood to get those guys injured too. So that's a position that may be a little bit more challenging during the spring in terms of practice bodies. But the biggest thing is to just get these guys healthy, right? The good news is you can, you were talking about this to open the show. You can draw a line directly from those guys and exactly what the issues were, right? Um, Dylan documented playing through some stuff, got it fixed. George Wilson, Cobby, you can draw a line to those guys. They missed last season. They had an issue, an injury that they had to get surgery for, and you're just continuing that process. So, same with Caleb Williams. If you go to the defensive line, defensive tackle, Caleb's kind of been through it in year one because he came in, missed spring last year, right, too, Wes. He recovers. They're getting him ready to go play later in the season and then breaks his leg, so then he's got to recover from that. So with most of these guys, not all, but a lot of them, you can kind of see the progression of, okay, this is what it was. It's not a new injury. The biggest thing is to get them healthy and ready for summer and then preseason and ultimately the 2026 season.
So Raj here, and then I think somebody on the Insiders Forum asked, if Josiah needed surgery, why was it not done right after the season ended? I don't know the answer there. I don't also pretend to know the exact specifics of the injury. I'm sure they had their reasons, and I'm also not sure it really would have mattered in terms of getting him back for the 2026 season. I think when Beamer says I anticipate he won't play in 2026, that's a very light way to tell you he's not playing in 2026. And my guess is that if there was any way for him to have truly played this coming season, it would have been all right, let's get this thing done, immediately. So I don't pretend to have an exact answer for you, but clearly this is something that is going to take a pretty decent amount of time to not only recover, but then sort of get yourself back and get yourself back built up. And, something he's dealt with for a while. And Chris, I think, there are some little whispers I've heard. I think really probably kept Josiah from being able to build the strength, the additional size that you would have wanted for him to be able to in the weight room, during the off season. I think Beamer mentioned this or alluded to it, kind of him having to be limited at times with some of the off-season stuff where you're really kind of getting back to the drawing board, saying, let's build up, let's build strength, let's build size. Let's look like an SEC upperclassman as opposed to an SEC freshman. All those things that you're going to see as a guy gets older within your program were limited, and we're probably going to be limited throughout his career until he got this done. So I think that's just where you are. All right. So now, Chris, we are down to assuming I did this correctly when I wrote it, I guess a month ago, South Carolina returning players on the O-line who were recruited as scholarship players. You're basically down to 5 now that would project to be available. You have Nolan Hay, Marky Anderson, Shed Surratt, Blake Franks, Damola Ajitahoon, and then of course you have your 8 transfer portal additions with Peak obviously being out for the spring. So that's kind of where you are in numbers in terms of scholarship guys. Where do you think this thing goes at tackle? Like I think it's very for one, it just getting Peak truly back and him being good to go and him being healthy next year becomes an even bigger priority, I think. But you're going to have to run through some options here, man. Beamer was asked and he said, look, we got some guys with versatility. Unless I missed it, he refrained from giving specifics, right?
Yeah.
So, you also, Chris, I'll be completely honest. I'll be frank. You have some guys that you brought in from the portal who we talked about this at the time. You're kind of sliding. It's like the NFL. You're sliding this guy to come in, be a depth guy. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And when people would look and say, well, hey, that player didn't really, do a ton where he was before, you're probably going, he's a depth guy. So
yep.
you don't want to get into a position where your recruited to be depth guys are sliding up into starting roles. So where do you go from there? You mentioned Poku. They want him as a guard, right? Like that's where they want him to play. So you'd love for him to stick there. Seth Smith is a tackle. Dane Arnett, a tackle, pretty sure. And I'm kind of going off where they've been before. Dude, I think this probably slides Shed Surratt back into the tackle category. I've been told in the lead up to spring, he's been working at tackle at least some. I don't know if that means exclusively, but he has been getting, reps in the team stuff they are doing right now at tackle. And I circled Damola Ajitahoon, who's only a redshirt freshman, but the prior staff was very high on him on the O-line, high on the upside, high on the ability. Can he take like that major step forward this year? I think will be something to keep an eye on because that would alleviate quite a few problems if Damola just took that jump already.
And he's certainly going to get more opportunities, in spring practice. He would have gotten plenty, I think. But that's going to be amplified with everybody you got out. I would also, and Wes, you might have mentioned him, but just to make sure, Armando Nieves, also from the portal class, thought of as a tackle, has played tackle in the past too. But you're right. Like you're not going to, when you're building a portal class, when you have the amount of guys that South Carolina brought in, you're not bringing in 10 starters. Yes, we all know open competition. If somebody that you brought in and maybe you think it's a depth guy ends up being a surprise and is the best guy, you play him, absolutely. He wins the job. But when you're building this roster, whether it's high school recruiting, portal recruiting, you're always looking at it going, how quick can this guy contribute? High school guys, you're bringing in some. That's a guy that needs to redshirt, develop, has a chance to be really good, has a chance to help us. Portal guys, yes. Is there more of an emphasis on playing right here, right now when you're brought in through the portal? Absolutely. But you're not bringing in a ton of guys on the portal with the idea of, hey, we're taking this guy, we're going to redshirt him, and in 2 years he'll contribute, right? Because a lot of the portal guys you're bringing in don't even have 2 years or 3 years of eligibility left. So you're right. You might dip in. You will this spring, absolutely, on the offensive line, dip into that depth more. And it could benefit those players because they're going to get even more reps. But we're sitting here having this conversation going up and down the scholarship breakdown, the roster. trying to figure out, okay, who slots where. Dane Arnett's another good example. We kind of talked about Surratt, Arnett, Poku. They've got some positional versatility. Dane Arnett played some left tackle last year, but that was at Ferris State. If you see him, he looks more like a guard, but can he play tackle? Yeah, he can. And will he? We don't know. I think that's one of the biggest things we're going to be looking at tomorrow morning, Wes. I do not know if we'll get your vaunted depth chart drill. I doubt it. I have doubts. At some point this spring, I imagine we're going to catch some kind of glimpse. It might not be tomorrow, of where exactly are these guys lined up, and how much rotation does Randy Clements do? He may be a guy that says, yeah, I'll cross-train you some, but not as much as we did in the past. They're going to have to be probably a little bit more flexible than they originally planned on being on the O-line.
Shane Beamer, I'm sure you're doing more important things than watching or listening to this show. Steve Fink as well. Can we please get a depth chart drill right off the bat on Wednesday?
First thing.
Please, like day one depth chart drill. We will owe you forever. And they probably have a different name for it. Depth chart drill for us is just whatever you guys do when you put the defense out there and do that flow to the football drill where you're not even running plays and we get to see who goes out there first. When you're running the offense out there for that little speed ball, some people call it, right off the bat, running a couple plays either against the defense or against air, and we get to go over there and scribble who's with the ones. Depth chart drill. Yeah. We won't even call it a depth chart. Promise.
Because there is no depth chart.
There's no depth chart.
Although Beamer did reference a depth chart today.
Mythical depth chart. We will not call it a depth chart. We will say, here's who was with the ones. If we can get it on Wednesday.
A group. A group and B group.
Yes. We'll be happy with just seeing the A group, honestly.
Alphabet drill. That's what we're going to call it.
Yes. Please. That would be fantastic. All right, dude, let's
speaking of the letter A, let me just go ahead.
Ooh.
Atsko. If you think, like, when you're going at, how people, Whiskey
I'm going to call you Collarhead today, man. That was
Whiskey Tango Foxtrot or whatever. Your A should, instead of Apple, it should be Atsko. Just remember that from now on. Atsko.com, ATSKO. Wes, we were talking about our friends from Ferry since 1926, Atsko since 1933. So, I mean, pretty dang close. Hunting, waterproofing, personal care, animal care.
Veteran companies on here, Chris.
We got some OGs, some guys that have been doing it for a long time. If you're an outdoorsman, Atsko's like a must check out. I'm going to be completely honest. I was not familiar with it before my guy Lee told us about Atsko, taking it over there recently. They have some tremendous products, skin protection, UV blockers. They've got products for your pets that are safe. They have for hunters the complete scent and sight solution, the zero UV residue scent. They've got special detergents for hunters, waterproofing, all sorts of stuff. So again, if you are an outdoorsman and you need waterproof clothing, outdoor gear, hunting gear, different hunting products for UV control, odor control, laundry care, outdoor gear, go check out our friends over at Atsko Solutions for all of those different areas in your life. Must check them out, atsko.com.
All right, shout out to Atsko and all of our great sponsors, Chris. All right, let's turn the page off of injuries. Let's just move away from that. No more injury talk.
That's right.
For the final 30 minutes of the show. And, dude, I want to get into newcomers you are most excited to see. And we could make a long list. So let's try to pare this thing down. Start off. Maybe we'll do two of each, but let's start off with one of each. And then tell me why. Chris, give me one transfer and why you are most, we'll say like most intrigued to see. And let's just assume we were actually getting to like watch all these practices. So I know we're not even going to see a ton but you're most intrigued to see him, hear about him, get the scoop on him. One transfer and then one freshman that fits that category for you.
And I only get one total. I don't even get one on each side of the ball.
Correct.
Yikes. That is a tough one because you're bringing in, I mean, there's a handful of guys that won't be from the freshman class that won't be on campus, but you're talking dang near 40 guys, Wes. That's a tough one. Let me give you one. So my first thought was I'm going Caleb Herring, right? Opposite Dylan Stewart. And I am very intrigued by him. Let me actually go with Tommy, though, at defensive tackle. Tommy, fifth school. We all know that. I think this guy has a maturity level. He's been around the block, been in college football a while. A guy that South Carolina is already familiar with because they recruited him out of high school in Delaware. A guy that, he's familiar with the South Carolina staff. And I think he's a really good, for one of the things we've picked up, I think he's a really good fit from a scheme standpoint with what South Carolina likes to do. He's kind of got that body type. He's not this overwhelmingly big guy, but neither were TJ Sanders, or Tonka Hemingway, right? I think Tommy is a guy. And again, like day one, I don't think I'm going to be able to walk away from the stretch and 3 periods of practice going, oh yeah, Tommy, right? I don't think we'll see enough, but just eyeballing him, watching him move, interested to see that. And I think the early pre-spring practice returns, Wes, have seemed to be positive with Tommy. So I'll go with him in terms of a transfer. There are a bunch, though. I mean, golly, you could go up and down that list. It's almost like if you would ask me 5 minutes before or 5 minutes later, I might have had a different answer. All right, so freshman. Out of the guys that are on campus, I mean, I think I've got to go. Let me go Jazavian Currents. I think it would have been easy to pick Julian Walker too, and I think he's going to have every opportunity. Safety for South Carolina, you do have some experience. You've got Peyton Williams and Gerald Kilgore back as seniors. You've got Busey in there as a third-year guy. You've got some guys who are, second-year players in that mix at safety. But can Jazavian Currents come in and make some noise? It's a guy that physically looks the part. We talked to Charles Power about him. I talked to the Shrine Bowl coach, Paul Sutherland, who just retired from being the head coach at Liberty in the upstate, Liberty High. And he absolutely loved what he saw from Currents throughout Shrine Bowl week, just with his leadership ability. I'm very interested to see just how quickly he can integrate into this defensive scheme, into Torian Gray's room. And after, a week or so, do we start hearing, hey, Currents is kind of making a play to get on the field? I would not be surprised by that at all. But he's someone I'm very intrigued to see and hear about in these first few days.
Yeah, I mean, Currents probably actually would have been my answer too, man. I'm going to give you somebody different, but if he's ready, don't you feel like he just raises the upside of that room?
Absolutely.
I think not that you're going to compare, and, we talk about this with Charles Power, you're not going to compare guys to Nicky, but just in terms of there are some similarities there in terms of the big-bodied safety who can just go make plays for you, can play near the line of scrimmage, is comfortable coming up tackling guys, but also is comfortable in coverage. Nick was/is the freakiest athlete you'll ever see. Currents is maybe further along than Nick was, I think, in coverage, just in terms of knowing, hey, the ball's thrown down the field. I may be beat off the bat, but I can close on this guy. I can use my size. I can use my length. I can use all the tools in my toolbox to make this pass not be completed. So I think Currents just has, I feel like this is one of those dudes who's been training his entire life for this next step, and then for that next step after that, obviously. And he's not going to be scared, there is a innate confidence with Jazavian Currents that It is very apparent. So, what does it look like for him? What does that safety room look like in general, man? I mean, Gerald Kilgore has been working some at safety, some at nickel. How does that kind of play out? Beamer talked about in passing last year, Kendall Daniels being someone that they really feel like has a very bright future at that position. So, how does it play out with the veterans and the young guys? Because you have some like freshman, sophomore types who are very talented, and then you have some seniors who have maybe played a little bit more, but don't quite have the upside. So I think there's going to be some interesting battles there. Let's go. Newcomers for me. And this is not someone who's going to play this year. I mentioned this on the radio today, man. I'm actually very intrigued for a high school guy. I want to see Duckworth out there and see how it compares to watching the other guys throw the football. What does he look like physically? I think it was mentioned. Who told us this? Or maybe it was a public thing. It was mentioned, I believe, that Landon's already put on some good weight. He's always been a prospect out of high school that I just went back and forth on what my expectations were for him. And clearly, he's not going to be expected to play much this year, if at all. You'd love to get him out there in like some mop-up duty and let him just go play. But obviously, quarterback is always a position you're looking to the future at as well. So just would love to get eyes on him and sort of see what just what the initial impressions are there on Duckworth. Charles Power did tell us that Cody Belair, seeing him in person at, the Mississippi Alabama All-Star game, I think he was referring to. Cody was even a little bit just kind of taken it back at how well the ball jumped off of Landon's hand. Mm-hmm. So we know he's a great athlete. We know he's got all the other things in place. So, what does he look like as an actual quarterback will be something I'll be keeping an eye on. I've been going back and forth, man, on who I would pick for my transfer. Let me cheat a little bit.
Okay.
This is my question. So I am very curious to see for the first time Christian Clark and Jabri Coleman side by side.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we've all kind of maybe not penciled Christian into a starting role, but penciled Christian into a pretty big role at running back. And I can't fight this feeling that Jabri Coleman is going to have something to say about it as well. We know Matt Fuller is back. We know Jawan Howell is back. There's a lot of different guys in that running back room, and they feel good about that room, but it's not a room like it was a couple years ago where you just circle, hey, Rocket Sanders is going to be the starter. You can talk about competition. You can talk about, all these different things. When game one hits, number 5 is getting the football. I think there's a really nice competition setting up here in the running back room. Now, you truly hope there's going to be some separation ultimately, and that it's not kind of like this past year where you're getting late into the year still trying to figure out who your best guys are. So that's just a very intriguing room for me, Chris, and I'm very curious to see what stamp does Stan Drayton as a veteran running backs coach put on that room, because, frankly, you're talking about a position group that Beamer has fired 2 coaches at that group. So
yep.
I think, he has said it. Stan Drayton, he has wanted to hire this dude for a long time. What type of stamp, as I said, can he put on that room moving forward?
Yeah, he's going to give a fresh set of eyes. And you've got you just look at that room on paper, Wes. You now got 6 scholarship guys. You've got some talented guys. And so I'm very interested in those. You got Sam Williams-Dixon, of course, from Ohio State too. Coleman, is one of those guys that was former highly rated. He was with Drayton at Penn State, was committed to Georgia at one point. Christian Clark coming from Texas as a former 4-star who rushed for 100 yards in the bowl game against Michigan. So they're drawing, more attention, and maybe rightfully so. But, I mean, these guys are talented. The interesting thing is that they are in kind of that separate bucket because you're really interested to look at them, but you're also recognizing, hey, they might not play much this year. Maybe they will. Maybe one of them or both of them are the best guys. You're looking at that room going, all right, well, South Carolina also has some guys that have been around this program or just been in college ball for a while. Isaiah Gustave. We sat there with Shane Beamer earlier this year, Wes, and he ran through Isaiah and how he probably could have played more last year on special teams and even at running back. But with it being his first year in the program, him coming in late, they wanted to just get him acclimated, redshirt him, bring him back. Then you've got Howell, who's shown some flashes. You got Matt Fuller, who's certainly shown some flashes. Those guys probably enter the spring as, like, if you're coming up with a mythical depth chart or like who's going to be out there first, like, it's probably those guys because they're returning from last year's roster. But there's going to be a lot of competition, probably one of the most competitive rooms on the roster, which is saying something because a lot of rooms fall into that category. There's a lot of options there. But I think those are good picks too. I kind of thought you were going to say Kelby Collins.
Yeah, I mean, you could have picked a bunch of guys.
You could have picked a whole bunch of, yeah.
I mean, Caleb Herring, Quay Scott, like they're it would have been Jakarius Peak if he was able to go through spring. Like, there's a bunch of different guys. I'm intrigued by a healthy Jaden Gibson, frankly. I think he's one of those where no outcome is really going to completely surprise you. Like, if he gets to 100% health and is back to what he was before physically, he could like ascend the entire depth chart. Or, frankly, he could maybe not play much at all. As we were talking through that, though, and kind of going a little bit to our conversation on Demola Ejidahun, there's a lot of talk, Chris, about obviously newcomers in the portal, newcomers, that are high school guys. And then, of course, everybody in the country has talked about Lenoris, Nick, and Dylan all returning to South Carolina. There's a group, in my opinion, that will probably shape this 2026 football team that do not get kind of like brought up as a group as much as all these other maybe groups. That is second-year players on this roster. And I think, and I was just going through, I'm going to pull up the commit list from last year. I was just going through this group in my head. There are a lot of second-year players on this roster that could play big roles and certainly that could step into much bigger roles than what they were in last year. And we already talked about Shed. We talked about Demola. We mentioned Kendall Daniels. How about the second year, like redshirt freshman or sophomore wide receivers? Donovan Murph, can he take a step? Jaden Sellers, we saw him take a step the last half of last year. Does he take another big step this offseason? Malik Clark, quiet year for him. Is he ready to kind of step into a much bigger role in the receiver position? The edge guys we talked about, Dodd and Anthony Addison, Jaquel Hallman, someone that was brought up to us. The staff really likes Mike Tyler. Like, he's someone at tight end that they believe can come in after playing quite a bit more on special teams last year and just in a couple of little kind of end of game situations. Can he take on a bigger role as like a pass catcher type tight end who can do a little bit of everything in that room? So I think maybe more than many recent seasons, you're looking at that group and saying there's a lot of potential in this group and there's like opportunity for them to step in and play a bunch. Does one of the linebackers step into basically that, what would you call, like the Jaron Willis role, like the fourth backer? You already kind of know who the three are. The fourth backer. And go through. Oh, you know who nobody's talking about enough either, Chris? Is DeMarcus Leach. Yes.
Yeah. I was about to bring him up if you didn't. I mean, Torian Gray does like to do. I mean, if you look back at a lot of the games, um, he likes to rotate some guys in and out at corner. And so this year it's going to be, Collier and Swain. Like those are probably your two guys. But DeMarcus Leach is someone that the staff was talking up last year. Frankly, I'll be completely honest. I was surprised when you looked out there early season, and here's freshman DeMarcus Leach, who, played high school quarterback, played safety, out there playing corner, early in his career as a true freshman. They feel like he's got a chance to be a really good player. And, another player that Shane Beamer brought up to us, during our conversation, our recent sit down with him, that kind of, he didn't say like nobody's talking about that, but you could just tell like the way he was talking about him, he's going to factor heavily into the plans, and he could end up being that third, heck, maybe even better, but he's kind of that third corner when you're thinking about him. Totally agree. He's kind of flying under the radar.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's probably the favorite for that role right now. Obviously, he's got to go do it, got to go earn it, but I think that's the expectation, is he's that next guy up. And just another classic T. Gray get, right? Going out, in-state guy, under the radar, has length, has just all the athletic markers that Torian Gray looks for. He had him in spades, and you're just saying, all right, how is he a football player, right? Because he has all the athletic stuff. And I would say so far, so good there, man. Not a second-year player, but I'm intrigued by Cassie Barnes at corner. I think that Cassie will get into that mix for playing time, maybe as that fourth guy. I guess you'd have Jalewis Solomon battling there too. We'll see. Let's see. Brandon says, if not Nick Harbor, who do y'all think will be the guy for wide receiver this year? I mean, I think it is Nick Harbor. I think Harbor is the one. Like, I think he's the number one receiver. Took a huge step last year. Think he'll take another step this year. But I do think, I think Jaden played very well down the stretch last year. That will be the same this year. We've talked about Donovan Murph for a long time. We're both very high on him, Chris. Can Malik Clark take a step? What does Nitro Tuggle do? You lost a couple of guys in the receiver room that were talented kids, right? And that I think, frankly, would have helped this team. I really do. So how do the other guys that are either entering that room or returning there kind of move forward?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, Gibson, got to get him healthy. When is that? He's a guy that had a good year as a true freshman at Oklahoma. So he's always one of those, you said this earlier, and I'll co-sign. Everybody always says, if he can get back to form, if he can get to that type of form, it's really a guy to look out for. Well, we won't see that immediately, at least. Nitro Tuggle, make you miss, explosive, can run, but the consistency, right? DJ Black, got probably not talking about him enough. How much does he factor in? The staff, I think, is going to give him every opportunity as a senior, as a guy who's played a lot, as a guy who's very familiar with Mike Fury, Wes, could step in there and make some noise. So, I mean, it's another very competitive room because, yes, you do have some experience coming back, but you've also got some of those young guys out of that freshman group that could come in and have a say. And then you got two transfers, at least one right now in the mix for spring, another really competitive spot. You're thinking about it in terms of that top six, probably going to be more of probably have your three starters, but six guys probably will play roughly, unless Kendall Browse kind of changes that structure and plays even more. So you're really battling to exit the spring, trying to be in that top six mix.
What do you think we learn about the Kendall Browse offense this spring, if anything?
Not a whole heck of a lot. I mean, I think Beamer talked about that today in terms of, hey, if we would have a spring game, it's going to be pretty vanilla, right? I think we'll hear some things about, how he's utilizing Lenoris Sellers. I think something you hope to hear is that, hey, Lenoris has really started, at least in terms of practice, streamlining his game, making good decisions, elevating his play within the structure of the offense. I think we know a lot of the concepts that he likes to run, but he's also catered those based on the type of quarterback and the type of personnel that he has, right? So, how much quarterback run do we hear of? Probably not a whole heck of a lot with Lenora Sellers in practice, right? Because you aren't going to want to be doing a whole heck of a lot of that. So I think we're probably going to leave spring hearing things about the offense, but maybe not a ton in terms of takeaways of, hey, they're loving this particular concept in practice, right? We might not hear, certainly we won't see a whole lot of that. I think what you got to hope for is that you get out of the spring and hear that the offense has been productive and that 16 has looked more like himself, more what you expect.
Yeah, man, I would love to see Lenora Sellers and the true like veer and shoot, like what Tennessee still does, the old school, like we're going to spread everybody from sideline to sideline. Because I think, man, when Tennessee was really going in that stuff, when like you can even go back to like the RG3 days, and I know Kendall Bryce is like, one thing I respect is this offense has like evolved, and it really truly, if you go out and look at some of the kind of tape that you can find on him where he's speaking at different, they have all these coaching convention type stuff where they bring in coordinators and he's speaking. He talks about, hey, Arkansas, we built everything around KJ Jefferson, didn't have a ton of receivers that could separate, so we wanted to find ways to create those like meshes and we went more bunch formations, tighter formations, trying to give guys a way to separate. Traditionally, when you look at what he's done, it's been more, hey, we're gonna spread them out as far as we possibly can, get you out of zone defense, make you play man, and then we're just gonna play the numbers game. We're gonna spit the ball out here to the perimeter if you don't have enough guys out there, and then if you bring everybody up, we're gonna throw over the top. We're going to run the quarterback if you have two safeties deep and just play the numbers game. So it's a lot more complicated than that. But I think the thing you can be excited about if you're a Gamecock fan, Chris, I think this offense will give Lenore Sellers the opportunity to take the layups. And I think a lot of the old school NFL approach is we've got to make everything not difficult, but we got to make everything, we got to justify everything we're doing and make it, dress it up, make it look smart. If there's off coverage, we can throw the hitch for 5 yards, man. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. It's crazy because this is going to sound weird, but I really believe it. That it seems like the plays that seemed easiest for South Carolina last year were explosive deep balls to Nick Harbor, which in theory are like your lower percentage plays, but for South Carolina, now they didn't hit a ton of them because you're not going to hit tons of those, but Nick Harbor is so fast and Lenore Sellers throws such a good deep ball that, how many times did we hear after a game where, they would hit one of those deep balls and the opposing coach is going, we were in 3 deep coverage. He's ran past us, that those plays worked for them. And you want those to continue to be a part of the offense, but you're sitting there watching the games last year. And to your point, Wes, you're just going, everything just seems hard, right? But some of that was self-inflicted. You're sitting there in 1st and 15, or you're sitting there in 2nd and 25 or 3rd and 18 after you take a sack or whatever it may be, but they just didn't hit enough of those layups. And so one of the things I'm watching for is Kendall Browse, implement those layups for Lenore Sellers and help them hit him. And can he also get better in what's, I think, been one of his deficiencies so far, which is that intermediate type passing game? Can he help him get more consistent in that regard? We know he throws a great deep ball. We know he's a supremely gifted athlete. But can he help him create more of an offensive structure that helps him kind of go up and down the field, whatever that looks like? Because in the past, things have just been too hard, quite frankly. I mean, especially last year.
And how willing is he to just let Lenoris run? Like, I think that was one of those things where, you know, you almost tried to give Shula the benefit of the doubt when he was talking about early on. Remember all the discussion? Like, we want him to run. We want him to run because he wants to run, not because he has to. Like, kind of all the semantics about whether they wanted Sellers to run less or not. And it really seemed like Shula was just a little bit hesitant to run his QB, especially early in the season in certain situations. I think we saw some flashes of what this offense will be, frankly, when Furry took over. Like, there were some good things there. Now you're just bringing in someone who's done it a little bit more, done it a little bit longer. And so, I think that one thing I can say about Briles, or one of the things I can say about Briles, he, at his previous stops, there's a little bit of and I'm not comparing him to Spurrier, but there's a little bit of a Spurrier mindset of, let's be hyper-focused on inventing ways to get our best few players to football in as many ways as possible. Spurrier, when he had Lattimore, he was not scared to run Lattimore 41 times. Spurrier was not scared to throw the fade to Alshon Jeffrey 3 times in a row at the goal line, even if it's not hitting. We're going to figure out who our best players are, and let's find every way possible to get them involved. And I think that's one thing that he has done, that Kendall Briles has done everywhere. So what does that look like at South Carolina? There's probably a lot of things you can do with the Nick Harbor, a lot of things you can do with the Lenoris Sellers that they're going to kind of maybe go back to the drawing board on. The other stuff, though, would be just like, hopefully there's some Lane Kiffin influence from their time together. I think one of the best things Lane has done is empowering his quarterbacks. Hey, if we got an easy throw out here, let's go ahead and let's make it 2nd and 5. Sometimes that guy on the outside, Chris, makes that corner who comes flying up miss a tackle, and our easy throw for 5 becomes an explosive.
Yeah. Well, and there just weren't enough easy access throws just in general, I don't think, last season. And everything we're talking about was compounded, right? Because you were struggling up front. You were struggling to run the football. Like, you can talk about play calling and scheme, like everything kind of compounded to where it was just tough to consistently do anything offensively. But that's certainly something. I mean, you're sitting there going all the time. You think back to the Oklahoma game, right? Like, Oklahoma's out there offensively. They weren't lighting it up when they played South Carolina, and they're out there just taking some easy access throws. And then on the other side, you're going, man, everything's so hard. You're sitting there as a Gamecock fan. I think a lot of them I talked to, why are we not doing that? And you're like, hey, it's a very fair point. So that's certainly something that I think they're going to try to dial in this year. It would be a sight for sore eyes for South Carolina fans.
Yep, no doubt. All right, y'all. Speaking of sore eyes, y'all are probably tired of looking at us, so we're going to get off here. We're going to get back to the drawing board, too, as we get ready to cover this spring practice. We'll be out there tomorrow. What did we say earlier, Chris? You said 9:38?
9:38. That's it. Yeah, right on the dot.
9:38 kickoff, spring practice, day 1. Gamecock Central will be on hand. Come hang out with us on GamecockCentral.com. We'll have our observations, our insights, news notes, and everything else from practice. And Chris, I think Kendall and our guy Jack Veltri are going to be doing a show tomorrow afternoon after that. So hopefully we'll be able to do these now that we got some spring ball to talk about on a little bit more consistent basis, but we'll let you know soon when Chris and I will be back on here. So shout out again to everybody who joined us in the chat, everybody who's listened, watched, and of course, all of our great sponsors here on GC Live. All right, y'all, let's go enjoy some spring ball, and Chris and I will see you soon.